Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC Rich, and I'm joined by my guest, Ben Dutter of Sigil Stone Publishing. Hey Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey Rich, thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to have you on. I've been a fan of yours from the early non-PBTA stuff that you've put out, from Vow of Honor through Belly of the Beast, and so it's neat to see that you've got a PBTA game out.
Yeah, we go way back, all the way in the early Indie Plus days. We did a podcast for Vow of Honor, I think, during its Kickstarter.
We sure did. All right, so tell me this, Ben. How long have you been playing PBTA games, and what was your gateway?
So I've been aware of PBTA longer than I've been playing it. I first was exposed to the Dungeon World Kickstarter, and that was about, 6 years ago or so.
Mm-hmm.
And been a long time admirer, but only really recently started playing in the last, 2 to 3 years now. Cool.
And did you start with Dungeon World, or did you start with something else?
Well, ironically enough, I started with World of Dungeons. So, in a way of speaking, yes, I did start with Dungeon World, but kind of a cut-down version, as I'm sure we'll talk about more later.
Sure we will. Cool. Did you play or run it?
I played, and then I actually I upgraded, I guess got the full version, quote-unquote, and started playing Dungeon World off and on, but I've read way more PBTA than I've managed to play. But I've played my fair share now, Apocalypse World plenty of times, and quite a few others.
Awesome. So is Dungeon World still your favorite, or is there a personal fave that isn't a game that you've written?
Well, I think probably Apocalypse World is my favorite because I still think it has the best kind of combination of everything with theme and mechanics. Obviously it's what started everything, and it kind of is the progenitor, so it makes sense that it's my favorite. But yeah, I am biased towards it.
Very cool. All right, well, let's jump on over here and talk about what's going on at our tables and read a Sitch. So Ben, I understand, like when I first approached you about being on the show to talk about Vagabonds, you and I talked about what's going on at our tables. You had this really interesting thing you wanted to discuss about RPG texts and examples. Lead us off. What did you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I think that examples are probably pound for pound the most important words you can use in an RPG text. When you teach your friend a new game, a lot of the times, especially for someone who's brand new to the tabletop, you teach them with an example. You give them a kind of a fictional, in prose example, if you will, and that helps people to kind of wrap their mind around how RPGs actually function and what they're doing and where the rules come in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that a lot of times as designers, and I'm just as guilty of this as anybody, we kind of overlook the importance of examples in both teaching the text and kind of showing what the game is all about.
What makes a good example to teach a particular rule? Or do you think that we should go rule by rule, or should you go with a group of rules and then show it in a longer example? Which do you think works better?
So, yeah, it's a good question. I think, again, personally, I'm not some kind of example pro. It's something that I struggle with a lot, but I have studied it quite extensively to try to make sense of it all. But in my opinion, there's two kind of main types of examples. There's kind of the inline example, something that's almost like a parenthetical set aside where the author would just kind of write a very concise, brief explanation of a rule in practice. You see this a lot with a core mechanic, or sort of like within the text of a paragraph, or within the procedures of any given mechanic. So that's the first category. And the second category is more of, I think, what most people think of when they think of a rules example, where it's an actual example of play. And that's kind of a prose-based example or an in-fiction example. And you might even have, the MC and all the players have names in the example, and then their characters also have names, and there's description around what the players are doing at the table, just as much, if not more, sometimes than there is description around what the characters are doing in the fiction. I think that's really interesting, and it's an interesting choice to decide when to use which kind and how much of which kind.
What is an example of a PBTA game that you feel has really solid examples?
Well, again, I'm probably biased, but I think Apocalypse World is especially good at it because the examples both prove or show the rule in play, but they also show so much around the game's theme and so much around what the game stories are supposed to focus upon. I think that that's really well done and unique and difficult to do, because you have to be just an excellent writer in prose to get that across and to convey that in kind of a natural dialogue and organic way. And it's also difficult to tie that back into your mechanics, and it's really only possible when your mechanics are really tightly bound with the game's theme in the first place. So there's a lot of kind of steps to even get to the level that Apocalypse World is able to achieve. But there's plenty of examples in Apocalypse World 2 that are the more simple, parenthetical, quick aside rules.
Yeah, I have to say, writing a game book as a text to learn the rules and writing examples that give a flavor for the type of stories while also showing how the rule works in play, that is a whole new level, right? That is super challenging to do.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, as a writer, this is Vagabonds is my 8th or 9th game now, and I still struggle with it. I've written hundreds of thousands of words, and I've scrapped hundreds of examples because it's super hard. It's one of the hardest things to do. I can bust out a kind of a procedural rule set, no problem, but writing provoking and thoughtful and clear and salient examples is probably the hardest thing to do, but arguably one of the most important you can do.
And I also think this is really helpful in play, because just reading a rule aloud isn't really going to help a player when they're first stepping into a new game, especially a PBTA game, because if they're coming from a more conventional style of game, like the jump between what people might call author stance and actor stance and that kind of stuff could be really head flipping. So what's something that you try to tie to, or what is a tip you would give to people for making good examples?
I think that it comes naturally out of having a lot of familiarity and comfort with your own game, and that's something that requires a lot of time kind of stewing on the topics and the themes that you want to highlight. And from play, the best examples are the ones that you can pull from actual real life playtest sessions or sessions from around the table, because there's going to be things that you haven't thought of as a writer. And of course, maybe you take those as inspiration and edit them down, but I don't think that there's any example that can be manufactured that will be nearly as good as the ones that kind of happen naturally around the table. So my tip, I guess, is play the hell out of your game and make sure that you know what actually is happening at the table with your rules, instead of just sort of your interpretation of it as the game's designer.
This one's a little left field, but do you think that one solid example for most rules is the way to go, or do you think that maybe somebody giving 2 or 3 completely different situations as examples of how to apply a rule is helpful more than confusing?
I do think that it can be helpful if it's done in the right context. I think maybe sort of in between those two is sort of stepping your examples in parallel with your rules. So you introduce maybe the first component of the procedure, then you do a small example, then the second component and a small example, and so on throughout all of the different steps of the rule, depending upon its complexity. And then at the end, you have a more detailed, maybe in prose, in fiction example. What I like to do too is, if that procedure has multiple potential interpretations or outcomes, whether that's mechanical or narrative, I would rather show 2 examples at the end as sort of a call-out sidebar, or in a highlighted box text or something that a player could skip and not be confused, but an MC or a GM or somebody or another designer could read it and say, oh, well, in this circumstance, the outcome of this player would have been this, but in this other circumstance, it's something totally different. So I think that it's good to go overkill on the examples until you're done with the game, and then you can go through one more time or several more times and kind of cut what's not needed.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's, you say the best examples come from play, so I know we're going to get that in a minute, but I want to learn a bit more about your most recent, this PBTA game that we're here for. So let's go open our brain to that. Open your brain. So Ben, I brought you on because I wanted to talk about this new game that's just recently come out. You had a Kickstarter for it that was pretty successful. The game is called, correct me if I'm wrong, Vagabonds of Dyfed?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, so Dyfed is kind of the American butchering pronunciation of it. I have a few Welsh players in cohorts who complain that I'm mispronouncing, because it's a real place across the pond, and it's closer to Dyfed. Sorry if I'm butchering that again, but yeah, I call it Vagabonds of Dyfed, or just Vagabonds.
Okay, wow. All right. I think I'm going to go with Dyfed. What is the setting? You say it's a real place, but I'm really curious. What's the setting? What's this game about?
So the game is meant to kind of harken back to old school D&D. So it's set in a kind of low fantasy Celtic environment, but the setting is a lot more of an implied setting. It's not so much called out. There's no information in the text around an actual place. It's more just sort of inferred from the types of moves that are available and the way that the characters work. There is like a proto monster manual type component in there as well. So it's, I guess you could call it like Dark Ages fantasy or British Isles fantasy.
Okay, interesting. Well, what are the mechanics of Vagabonds that are different than, say, Apocalypse World?
So the biggest thing is Vagabonds is, I tried to make it as atomically small as possible. You know, I really am a huge fan of super concise games, one-page games, things like that. World of Dungeons, all of John Harper's stuff is great for that. And so that's a huge, touchstone for Vagabonds. And I really wanted to kind of distill down the core of what I liked about PBTA and the initial reaction that I had 6 years ago or so when I first played it. And I wanted to pair that with another movement that I'm a big fan of, it with the OSR. So all the mechanics around it are, I would argue, a little bit closer to OSR compatible. They're closer to like BX D&D or Labyrinth Lord, and not as familiar as Apocalypse World. So it's definitely, a third or fourth generation PBTA game in that it kind of has it in its DNA, but it doesn't follow the familiar formula so much. The biggest departure, though, for sure, is that there's no playbooks, and that there's only one core move. So again, if you're familiar with World of Dungeons, it's similar to that, and it's a very concise kind of core mechanic.
It's still 2d6, right?
Yeah, it's still 2d6, but instead of using the stat like cool or whatever, there's actually multiple traits that you have, and this was somewhat inspired by City of Mist, is another PBTA game that is similar to this, where you have these kind of narrative character traits, and they function sort of like a tag or a descriptor, and when those are relevant, they add the bonus to your roll. So the more kind of backgrounds that you have that affiliate with the action that you're completing, the better your chances are at doing it, and doing it well. So, and it's the same split, 6 minus, 7, 9, etc., except that in World of Dungeons fashion, there's a critical roll on a 13 plus.
So you only ever have positives? You just add up your good traits and get to roll 2d6 plus that?
So there are negative traits too, and there's actually the GM can bestow traits on a player too. So like if a character is injured or something like that, then that can come in as a penalty to a roll. And I do use, I want to say Pig Smoke was maybe the first PBTA game to do this, but plenty of 2d6 games do this now with advantage and disadvantage, where you roll 3d6 and either take the top or the bottom, depending upon the circumstances as well.
Nice. So, like some of these other games, you've done away with +1 forward. Is that what you're saying, Ben?
Yeah, sorry. I don't mean to get rid of the show title here, but
oh man,
I know.
I can't call it roll with advantage. It's okay. I'm sticking to my guns. You stick to yours.
Okay.
It's okay. It's okay. What about damage? How's that handled?
So yeah, this is, it's a dungeon crawl system, right? So it's designed really for to be compatible with those old school modules. You can pick up something from Lamentations of the Flame Princess or Basic and just run it pretty much as is with very few tweaks. And one of the core things about that was making sure that the damage dice mechanic was really seamless and fluid. One of the things about OSR games especially is they really want fast, lethal combat. So that was a big focus for me from the design standpoint. So one of the things that I am a little bit proud of is the ability for a player to roll their 2d6 roll and not only calculate how well that they did, but also how much damage was dealt. So if you're familiar with something like Dungeon World, and with separate damage dice, or even World of Dungeons sometimes has different damage mechanics for certain weapons and so forth, this kind of aggregates it all into a single roll. So the better you roll, the more damage you can do.
I dig that. That is cool to streamline it. Sometimes you can roll really well and then you roll crap for damage.
Exactly.
I like the idea of combining that. That's nice.
That's right.
So you say that there is only one core move, but one of my normal questions here is what's your favorite move and why? So maybe you could expand that out a little bit.
Sure. So there's the core move, which is, it's basically like defy danger, because again, your characters are essentially always thrust into some kind of situation that's dangerous, right? And if it's not super dangerous, then there's no real need to roll. So that's kind of the core of the game. However, there are other moves that are sort of tertiary to the character or connected more to the character's downtime or to their backgrounds. And so there's sort of these little like subsystems. And one of my favorites of those is each character has a core flaw. And that core flaw is more than just something that's a weakness. It's a significant character flaw. It's a philosophical issue that they have. I describe it in the text as a lie in the world that they believe, or some kind of vice that they can't escape. And so I have a move for engaging with your core flaw that lets the player or the GM kind of trigger it and cause the PC to get stuck in a situation that they normally wouldn't. But it's all because of a consequence from their core flaw.
That feels very pulpy. I like that. That's cool. Well, I would like to see this in some action, Ben. Do you think maybe we could act under fire, run this through a quick little demo?
Oh, for sure. I'd love to.
It is time to act under fire. So, in this demo, I would like to play Plussy. Now, there are no actual playbooks, but you do have some kind of, like, what do you call them, archetypes, maybe?
Yeah, there's character archetypes, and they're just sort of the classic early D&D. There's the adventurer, and there's the kind of the priest type, and there's the magic user type. So, if you like the idea of a playbook, and you don't want to sit down and write out all of your character traits, then you can just pick one of these up and play pretty quick.
Well, with that in mind, I have to say I really enjoyed the picture for the adventure. When I read through, I thought, this guy's kind of cool. So I'm going to be playing Plussy the Adventurer, and he is a human. I am only first level with 10 hit points, 1 armor, and a -3 speed. That sounds really terrible, Ben. Am I that slow? I'm scared.
It's not that bad. It's similar. So I did away with some of the jargon in some other PBTA games like load versus speed. So basically your load just is a direct penalty to your speed now. So everything is just measured in negative speed, essentially. So -3 is not bad. You're about as fast as a typical bison or something like that.
Okay. And since you mentioned core flaw, I have the core flaw of I never have to suffer my problems so long as I keep moving and running away from them.
That's a great one. That's a great one.
Yeah, it is. It is great. So cool. That's my character. What do we need to do?
So I think what we'll do is we'll start off. Let's go through some of your traits a little bit so I get a little bit of a better understanding of your character. And these, again, are really important and relevant for when you're trying to actually accomplish a task and make our dice roll. So give me a couple of those traits just so I have a vision of your character.
The approach to conflict is run today, fight another day, right? My goal is plunder, pillage, and profit. Nice alliterative goal there. And my background, I think this is interesting. I grew up in the ship's galley, which means that I'm used to the motion of the ocean. I'm also, not so bad in knowing about how to scrimp and save certain types of food and combine things into edible soups when things are rotten, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of a background of piracy, maybe, ship's galley.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I like that a lot.
Excellent. Well, I think what we'll do, if you're okay with that, we'll just start you off kind of in media res in a situation with Plussy here.
Okay.
And I'll just kind of lead us in and describe the scene, and then we'll see how you handle it.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So Plussy finds himself sitting at a kind of a creaking wood table inside of a, for lack of a better term, a longhouse. It's essentially a roadhouse or something that multiple generations of a single family would live in. Imagine kind of these Celtic or early Viking era type rough wood and wattle and daub construction. It's nighttime. It's raining outside. You can hear kind of the pitter-patter of the rain on the thatched roof. Sitting at the table around you is this family who agreed to allow you to stay there for a few silver. you had nowhere else to go, and you were a little bit afraid of what was following you outside. So what's Plessy like here? And he's sitting around. There's Yorvin, the grandfather, is this kind of gruff older guy missing some fingers, staring at him across the table, and Grelda, who's the kind of the matron of the household, she's knocking around and kind of bringing different pieces of soups and meats to everybody at the table from the hearth.
Well, Plessy is still in his gambeson, which is his armor. He's put the short bow on. If there's a peg near the front, some place to store the short bow, it's not strung because that can ruin a string. I think that he's actually even taken his cutlass on its belt, and he's left that not far away, but he's not wearing it to eat as we sit at this table. He's a little suspicious, right? This is the middle of nowhere. It's better than sleeping out under the stars when things could wander by, but not too much better. Now, they have a daughter, don't they?
Yeah, so there's also sitting across from you is Broomy, who's maybe a young teen daughter. She's definitely the eldest of the children here. She seems kind of nervous or almost like quivering, and every time she speaks, her voice kind of trembles slightly, and she doesn't really want to make eye contact. And on the other hand, across from you is Wendell, her little brother, this boy who's just staring at you full in the face, kind of aghast at this person who's in his house, probably the most interesting person he's ever encountered in his life.
Well, the boy is a boy, but this girl's nerves, I'm not sure exactly what to think about that. So, is it Yorvin who leads any conversation? He said that Grelda is pretty chatty as well. What do they talk about?
Yeah, so Yorvin kind of just, he asks you a little bit about your travels, what brings you here, but Grelda is really the one that dominates the conversation. She has this sort of loud cackling laugh and a big personality. She's a large person, and she kind of leans over you and slops down a big clay bowl of some sort of stew or soup and lets out like a chuckle. Eat up now. And her tone of voice seems almost a little bit strained, a little bit on edge.
I explained to them, no, I'm traveling across the ways. I'm trying to get back home. My sister isn't well. I received word. Normally I'm involved on the seas, but I came to port and trying to traveling home. Notice this, you've served me, Grelda. It looks very interesting.
Grelda kind of looks down and then laughs again, and her laugh is almost explosively loud, and too loud for this close quarters. And her weakened husband, Thon, who's kind of off in a hay bed in the corner, just sort of coughs and rolls over. And there's a very strange vibe as everyone stares at you, kind of waiting to see if you'll dig your spoon into the bowl or not. And Wendell, the son, who's maybe about 8 or 9, again, just kind of his mouth hangs open in anticipation.
Oh, this is spooky.
Grelda definitely does not answer. She just sort of like blushes and looks at you with a big, cheeky smile. Broomy, the daughter, she's still kind of is almost like hiding from you, not making eye contact. Her back is always to you, and just sort of giving fleeting glances over her shoulder, and she walks around.
I don't trust this situation. Is there anything I could do about this food? They seem super eager for me to have this food. I'm in the middle of nowhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can make a roll to see if there's something amiss, whether like read the people here or try to detect if there's something wrong with the food itself.
Okay. Well, I feel like my approach to conflict, run today, fight another day, feels like it fits here.
Totally. Yeah, I think that would work.
Growing up in the ship's galley also feels like a trait that works here.
Yeah, I think that you would have had to been able to smell all kinds of rotten, poisonous things, so that'll give you the edge. So get a +2 to your roll.
All right, here we go. I rolled a 5, but +2 gives me a 7.
Ooh, it's right on the cusp. Okay, so you definitely are aware that there's some kind of anticipation. There's a sense of almost desperation here, and Thon, the wounded invalid father, again just kind of coughs, and he rolls over with these feverish eyes and just kind of staring at you. And Grelda smiles once again and just waves with both of her plump hands. Go on, eat it. It's delicious, I promise. So you know that definitely something is up, but you don't know quite what it is.
I'm not the only one eating, right? I'll grab Wendell's bowl and say, there's more here. You need to grow, young man. Here, I'll take this bowl, and I swap bowls.
So as you kind of reach across the table, Yorvin, who's this, stout, kind of bearded, older gentleman, he's the grandfather here, the patron for sure, and he just kind of smacks his hand down on your wrist. You can see that his pinky and ring finger have been cut off. His hands are heavily calloused, and it just feels like a vice grip as it kind of smacks onto your wrist. And I think at that moment, I would like to complicate the situation by triggering your core flaw. So your core flaw is that you never have to suffer your problems so long as you keep moving and running. Well, it just so happens that what you've been running from has finally caught up to you, as everyone hears a booming, pounding knock on the door. What does Plessy do?
I sit back, pulling my hand away from Yorvin. I won't take the boys' food, but I'm definitely not going to eat, and I'm going to get up and move over towards the belt and my cutlass. I think I need to go.
So as you kind of get up and start backpedaling towards that, Yorvin just says, "What did you bring here, boy? Who is that?" And he actually kind of stands to follow you. And almost as if on cue, the door just crashes open. And standing there in the rain is the silhouette of 3 figures, kind of cloaked and drenched.
I quickly cinch the belt and draw my cutlass. Who's there?
So as you kind of draw and present yourself, you hear a familiar voice, and pushes his hood back and steps forward kind of into the candlelight from the tallow wax candles that are here in this longhouse. And you see it's none other than Altred, your former companion, who also happened to be the leader of a little crew that you abandoned about 3 weeks ago.
Altred.
So he smiles as he kind of steps in.
Well, Altred, they don't have much for you to take, but they were trying to poison me, so I'll just make my way out of here.
Oh, I'm not here for them. And he just kind of lets a small, slow, gaunt smile, his white hair glowing in the candlelight, and you're familiar with his blue-stained teeth as he kind of grins at you. And flanking behind him on either side, you can see 2 of your former compatriots, Friednan, who's this kind of bald, thick, squat fellow, very militant, former mercenary, and Marth, who you know is a keen shot and a sharp eye, and sort of staying in the shadows. You do see that Marth's bow is strung, unlike yours. And now Yorvin and the others in the house are concerned. Everybody's just sort of frozen at this intense situation, waiting to see what you do.
No, Friednan, Marth, you survived. Good. I'm looking around. There's a thatch roof here. Is there a way I could perhaps step onto a bench and pull myself up and through the thatch to get out on the other side of this building?
It's definitely possible. The roof is a very steep kind of A-frame, so in order for you to reach the ceiling, you would have to be somewhat close to the wall, which the table happens to be, so you certainly can do it, but you best believe that these guys are not going to let you get away that quickly. So I'll let you go ahead and make a roll, but do so at disadvantage. So you roll 3d6, but pick the worst 2 die.
Okay, I think I'm trying to run today, fight another day.
Totally.
And my weakness is that I do things that are highly risky, so I think that might cancel out.
I think actually here I'll treat your weakness almost as a benefit, right? I'll give it a positive bonus to your aptitude this time. So, because even though it is risky, that riskiness is kind of unpredictable. So they're not expecting you to try to run through the roof.
Yeah, well, I don't expect that I'll get that done either. I've rolled a 1, a 3, and a 4, so the 1 and the 3 are the worst. 2, a 4, plus 2 gets me a mere 6.
Ooh, failure. So as you try to scramble onto the table, it's kind of a mad dash to see who can trip you and bring you down first. Yorvin surprisingly kind of pulls a small hand axe out and bears it at you. Meanwhile, Friedman, a kind of muscular, thick, militant fellow who you abandoned in a precarious situation a few weeks back, just grunts, "No thanks to you," in your earlier comment, slams you kind of down on the table. So you find yourself face down, smashed into the clay pots and candles that were everybody's dinner here, and Altred pulls his dagger, prepared to fight.
Knowing I'm going to have to face off with these 3, I'm severely outnumbered. I glance to Yorvin and I say, "I'll give you half of what's theirs if you help. They've got way more gold than I."
You know, that's actually kind of convincing. Yorvin would maybe believe you. So go ahead and roll, though, because he's not really willing to put himself in any extra danger. But I will give you advantage because Yorvin's been around the block a few times. He knows what's up. So he wants to believe you.
Well, I am a little overeager here, which is my gimmick. And I think with my goal of plunder, pillage, and profit, I am kind of speaking the language that might appeal to Yorvin.
Totally.
So I'm going to take both of those if those traits fit. Here we go. I just rolled boxcars, buddy. So
awesome.
I think he's fighting on it.
So Yorvin just kind of smirks and almost imperceptible nod as you're kind of laying down on the table here, and he lets that hand axe fly, and it just starts spinning through the air and catches Fiednan right in the shoulder, and he just kind of lets out like a low grunt as you hear it thwack into his armor. But that gives you an opening to kind of roll away from danger. What do you do from there?
I'm going to roll away from danger and then come right back at Friedman because he's dealing with that axe. If I can get him down and out of the fight, then it's 2 on 2.
That's right. Go ahead and roll then to hit him, although I will say he is a challenging opponent, so take -1 to your roll to start off.
And we use traits for this as well?
That's right, and you are in an ideal range for your cutlass, so it does function similar to your trait tag, so it will give you a bonus here too. So take a +1 from your cutlass, so that balances the penalty out from Friedman's skill set, and now just apply your normal traits as usual.
Well, I don't think I'm running, but I am going for some plunder, pillage, and profit here. None of my others, no, I don't think any of the others really apply unless you see anything.
I think that does it, so take a +1 to your roll.
All right, here we go. I rolled an 8 plus 1 is a 9.
Awesome. So yeah, you're able to kind of charge forward. What was your lowest d6 that you rolled?
The lowest d6 that I rolled was a 2.
So 2 plus 1 from your aptitude, which is the bonus to your roll. Mm-hmm. And that's how you calculate damage. Oh. So you did 3 damage to Friedman. Now this guy's just a low-level fodder. That's not enough to kill him, but it's enough to seriously wound him, especially with Yorvin's axe sticking in his shoulder. So how do you do it?
I come straight across with a slash because a cutlass is a good slashing weapon. Headed for, I know he's going to raise his forearm, so I'm just going to slice across that forearm, hoping that plus the axe is going to make him weak enough to drop out of this fight.
So yeah, just like you thought, he raises his arm and that cutlass just slides his flesh open right to the bone, and you just see kind of an arterial spray, and he backs away stumbling in shock. And Altred and Marth are not as confident as they were about 2 minutes ago. I think that's a great place for us to stop.
Oh man, but will Plussy and Yorvin survive?
You could have a new NPC companion, this grizzled old Viking warrior. That'd be pretty neat.
So tempting. Cool. Well, Ben, I gotta say thank you so much for coming on +1 Forward and show me Vagabonds of Dyfed. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really glad I was able to come on, and I'm a big fan of the show, so it's a little surreal to be here, and after all these years again, Rich and I on a podcast together, it's great. So I'm really thankful you brought me on.
And this can be purchased on DriveThru RPG, right? And is there anywhere else that people could pick up Vagabonds, especially if they want a physical copy?
So DriveThru is the way to go. I do have the PDF and the print-on-demand version there, and they actually have distinct layouts. I made a separate layouts just for PDF and a separate one just for print. So they have the same aesthetic, but they're ideal and optimized for their respective format.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ben.
Thanks, Rich.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at +1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.